Okay, review session for AP2, Exam 3, which will include the gastrointestinal system and the endocrine system. Now, Dr. Sloan did the gastrointestinal system for you and completed the gastrointestinal system. Am I correct in that statement? Yes? Okay. And we'll do the endocrine system today. I've already posted the PowerPoints for the endocrine system. I also took particular time to highlight those slides that you need to pay particular attention to. Those of you who've already gone through those slides have probably noticed that. I would really key on those slides, not that the other information isn't important, it is, but I took particular time to highlight that because I'll have to go through the endocrine system kind of fast today. And when I take time to highlight a slide, it should give you some indication as to how you should focus your studying. So, okay, but you have to know the other information for those individual slides to make sense. So just pay attention to that. Now, the first thing we're going to start off with is the review for the digestive system, and then we'll do a digestive system lab, and then we'll also do the endocrine system lab. Not many slides for the endocrine system. There are some structures that I do want to pay particular importance of in the lab portion, so I want to make sure you can identify certain structures. We'll start off with this first illustration, which demonstrates to you the parotid gland, the parotid salivary gland. I would expect you to be able to recognize that, and the parotid duct that leads to the oral cavity. Would expect you to be able to recognize that. There are two other salivary glands, the sublingual gland and the submandibular gland as well, and each of which has a duct. You can see the sublingual duct or submandibular duct located here on the illustration. But I would expect you to be able to identify the parotid gland, the duct that leads from the parotid gland, submandibular gland, and sublingual glands. Teeth are important. I didn't ask you anything about the teeth on the exam, on the lab exam. Okay? Teeth are important, but I don't want you to spend a lot of time on that. Not trying to make you dentist or anything. The esophagus, if you remember before when we talked about histology, I would expect you to know the epithelial tissue that lines the esophagus. This is an opening to the external environment. As we've talked about before, we typically see stratified squamous epithelial in these surfaces that have exposure to the outer surface or the outer environment. Portions of the stomach that are important for you to recognize. You should know where the cardia of the stomach is located. You should know where the fundus of the stomach is located. So when I ask for a particular part or region, identify this region of the stomach, you should be able to identify the fundus, the cardia, the lesser curvature of the stomach, the greater curvature of the stomach. You should be able to identify the rugae folds that are inside the stomach. And then you should also be able to identify the pyloric sphincter. And you should also know that the first portion of the small intestines, as it comes off of the stomach, is the duodenum. So I would expect you to recognize that. You should know the pyloric channel as well, and the portion referred to as the pylorus. And you should know the portion referred to as the antrum. Okay? So, again, cardia, fundus, lesser, greater curvature, pyloric sphincter, duodenum, pyloric channel, pylorus, and antrum of the stomach. And then these are the rugae folds of the stomach. You should know the layers of the mucosa. I can't remember if this was a lab question or if this might be actually a lecture exam question. The layers of the tissue in the colon and the intestines, the serosa, the muscle layer, the circular muscle layer, and the submucosal layer, and the muscularis mucosa. Again, you know how I usually ask those questions. I want them in order, starting from the most superficial to the deepest, from the deepest to the most superficial. So you should be able to identify these layers. Now, there are I don't think I used this photograph, but there are regions, maybe coming up on another slide. I'm going to skip over this for now because I think it's actually on another slide. This is, and again, this is another slide that shows you the mucosal layer, the muscularis mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa, and the serosa layer. Lacteals, we already did. Lymphatic system. Now, the biliary duct, biliary system, you should be familiar with. You should be familiar and be able to identify the common bile duct on this picture, and it's also another picture out of your book that I would expect you to identify the common bile duct. Common bile duct made up of the cystic duct and the hepatic duct. On another photograph, you should be able to identify those two ducts which combine to make the common bile duct. There's a pancreatic duct as well. You should be able to recognize the parts of the pancreas, the body of the pancreas, the tail of the pancreas, and the head of the pancreas. The pancreatic duct and the common bile duct empty into the duodenal papilla. This is a sphincter apparatus. I don't have the picture here posted, but there is another picture in your textbook that shows this sphincter apparatus. Not that I'm asking you about the sphincter, I'm just making a teaching point here. This sphincter is a muscle. Dr. Sloan may have talked about sphincters are muscles that squeeze off. So as digestive enzymes are coming from the pancreas, our bile is coming from the liver, are reserved in the gallbladder and secreted, come down the common bile duct. This sphincter has to open up to let those secretions enter into the duodenum, where some of the substances will neutralize, bicarbonate will neutralize the acidity of the substances that come out of the stomach. The enzymes from the pancreas will help break down things like carbohydrates and fats. And so this is secreted into that portion of the duodenum, so the sphincter has to open up. Medically, it's important because patients who pass gallstones, as the gallstone travels down this duct, it's very painful. And sometimes the duct can, the stone can get hung up in that sphincter. The sphincter will squeeze too tight and won't allow the stone. And they actually have to take an endoscope and go in and open up the sphincter. They literally cut the sphincter open and let the stone fall in the colon, and so it can pass on out. So it's a very important landmark. So when you have patients that suffer from cholecystitis, which is an inflammation of the pancreas, they typically will have to undergo some type of procedure that will unblock these ducts, and especially if it's caused from a gallstone. Okay. Again, so pancreatic duct, common bile duct, and another picture I'll show you, the hepatic duct and the cystic duct. You should know the parts of the pancreas, tail of the pancreas, pancreatic head, body of the pancreas. This is the duodenum. That's the duodenal papilla. Should know the lobes of the liver. Easy enough, right and left lobe. Don't let me confuse you on the test. The falciform ligament, which holds the liver in position. Should know the location of the gallbladder. It's another picture that shows you the hepatic duct, the cystic duct, how it forms the common bile duct. Portions of the gallbladder, the fundus, the body, and the neck. I think you got about 3 questions, maybe 4 off this picture. Should know the portions of the colon. You need to know the hepatic flexure. You need to know the splenic flexure. You need to know the sigmoid colon. You need to know where the cecum is located at. You need to know that structure identified as the ileocecal valve. You need to know where the appendix is located at. You need to know ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon. Okay? You should be able to identify the inferior mesenteric artery. You should be able to identify the superior mesenteric artery. This is all old stuff. You should be all over this, right? Don't jump up and down, everybody. Okay? So you should know those structures. Review. You should know hepatic flexure. You should know splenic flexure. You should know ascending, transverse, descending colon. You should know sigmoid colon or rectosigmoid colon. Should be able to identify the cecum, appendix, ileocecal valve. You should be able to identify the inferior mesenteric artery and the superior mesenteric artery. Endocrine system. You need to know the portions of the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Pars tuberalis, pars distalis, pars intermedia. You should know the posterior lobe, pars nervosus. You should be able to identify where the hypothalamus is located at. You should know where the optic chiasm is located at. And you should know the stalk that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland as the infundibulum. And then you should know the location of the thyroid gland. You should know the term the isthmus of the thyroid gland. Isthmus of the thyroid gland. You should know the blood supply, the superior thyroid artery, and the inferior thyroid artery. You should know the location of the adrenal gland. It sits superior to the kidneys, one on each side. You should know the difference between, or anatomically, the location between the cortex and the medulla. And you should know the divisions of the adrenal cortex, which are zona reticularis, zona folliculata, and zona glomerulus in the capsule. See, I've narrowed the test down to about, it will be probably 40 or 50 questions. I think I got it narrowed down to about 70 questions right now. So we'll just go over some key points here. If you know these key teaching points, should be okay for the exam. We'll start with the gastrointestinal system. Again, you need to know the type of epithelial tissue that lines the esophagus. As we know it, digestion starts in the mouth. There are two enzymes that are produced in the mouth. You should be familiar with those two enzymes and what they help to break down, what food they help with, protein, carbohydrate, lipids, whatever. Two enzymes there. Anatomically in the mouth, there are some structures, the frenulum, the uvula, the gingiva. You should know and be able to identify what those tissues are by description. Frenulum, uvula, gingiva. You should know the epithelial tissue that's located in the stomach and in the small intestines. Primarily responsible for absorption. You're already familiar with that. You should be able to track food. If you swallow food in the mouth, you should be able to track the food through the esophagus, through the stomach, out of the stomach through the pyloric channel, through the pyloric sphincter, into the small intestine, through the small intestine, into the cecum, into the large intestine. If you have to make an incision through the bowel wall, you should be able to go through the layers in order: serosis, muscularis, submucosa, mucosa, or vice versa: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, serosis. You need to put that in the correct order. Okay. You need to know, where would you find microvilli at? What's the importance of microvilli? Need to be familiar with anatomically the structure of a tooth, where the enamel is located at, where the dentine is located at, where the cementum is located at, and where the pulp would be located at. You need to know the role and function of the parietal cells. You need to know the role and the function of chief cells. You need to be familiar with the anatomical structures of the large intestines, and we've already showed you the large intestines on the lab review. Again, remember: ascending colon, hepatic flexure; transverse colon, splenic flexure; descending colon, rectosigmoid colon. So you need to know those anatomical divisions of the large bowel. You need to know the location of the pyloric sphincter and the function of the pyloric sphincter. Anatomically, you need to know where the small intestine is located at and what the function of the small intestine is. And again, you would need to be able to follow after absorption has taken place in the small intestines, and then residual food is now being passed through the colon, goes through the cecum, now it enters into the large bowel. You need to be able to follow the food through the ascending colon, through the hepatic flexure, through the transverse colon, splenic flexure, down the descending colon, through the rectosigmoid colon, and out the rectum. Need to know the role of bowel salts. Bowel, B-I-L-E, salts. You need to know what a cholecystectomy is. You need to know where bowel, B-I-L-E, bowel, B-I-L-E. You need to know where bowel is produced at. Where it's produced, not where it's stored. You need to know the lobes of the liver. Right lobe, left lobe, caudate lobe, quadrate lobe, lobes of the liver. You need to know the functions of the pancreas. Remember, when I say function, I'll be generic. It has an endocrine function and an exocrine function. Dr. Sloan probably covered that a little bit. We'll cover that a little bit more today. Need to know the function of the stomach. You need to know the function of the small intestine, and you need to know the function of the large bowel. Function of the stomach, function of the small bowel, small intestine, and function of the large intestine. Primary function. I know it's got a lot of function, but I mean the primary role. You need to know where you would find the myenteric plexus. Causes of heartburn. What causes heartburn to occur? You need to know the functions of the liver. You need to know the purpose of peristalsis, how peristalsis is important. You need to know where bicarbonates are produced at and why they're important in the GI system. You need to know the role of the portal vein, why that's important in the digestive system. And then we've already talked about the lymphatic system, but specifically the substances that are absorbed by lymph capillaries. What substances are absorbed by lymph capillaries? For the endocrine system, the role of the endocrine system, and just generally the relationship between the endocrine system and the nervous system. We'll cover a lot of this today. Need to know the major categories of the hormones. When I mean major categories, there are amino acid derivatives, there are peptide derivatives, and lipid derivatives of hormones. And again, we'll go over that in more detail today. You need to know what the primary catecholamines are. Primary catecholamines: epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine. You need to know what amino acid they're derived from, the catecholamines. You need to know primarily where steroid hormones are synthesized from. You need to know what's involved in the activation of G protein. And again, if you haven't done the reading or looked at the PowerPoints yet, you probably don't know what, and I'll cover it today. But the G proteins, what's involved in the activation of G proteins. What is meant by secondary messenger, and what are some secondary messengers in the endocrine system? You need to know what's meant by the endocrine reflex. You need to know what's meant by simple endocrine reflex. How many hormones are involved in a simple endocrine reflex? You need to know the role of the hypothalamus. You need to know what the term pulses mean as it relates to hormones being released from the pituitary gland. You need to know the term negative feedback, how that relates to homeostasis. You need to know where the infundibulum is located at. Probably already know that from the anatomy lab. You need to know the portions of the anterior pituitary gland. Again, that's a recap of the lab. You need to know where the antidiuretic hormone is produced and the function of the antidiuretic hormone. You need to know where oxytocin is secreted at and what the role of oxytocin is. You need to know where you would find the portal vessels. You need to know the function of antidiuretic hormone. Function of antidiuretic hormone. What are the target cells for antidiuretic hormone? Where does it act at? Similarly, when we talk about oxytocin, you need to know what the target cells are for oxytocin as well. The thyroid gland secretes thyroxine and triiodotyrosine. You need to know which one of those are the active form of the thyroid hormone. You need to know the physiological effects of the thyroid hormone. There's another hormone also produced by the thyroid gland. You should be familiar with that. That's calcitonin. You should know what the function of calcitonin is. You should also know the role of the parathyroid hormone, the relationship between the parathyroid hormone and calcitonin. You should know what the major mineralocorticoid is, aldosterone, and what its function is. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. Major mineralocorticoid. Mineralocorticoid. And that's aldosterone. Just trying to help you at spelling. Mineralocorticoid. And aldosterone is the primary agent. You need to know what the role is of aldosterone. You need to know what's produced in the zona reticularis. You need to know what's secreted in the adrenal medulla. You need to know what's secreted from the kidneys, calcitriol, erythropoietin, and renin. And you need to know just the basic role what each one of those hormones does: calcitriol, erythropoietin, and renin. Now, in the pancreas, you have alpha cells and beta cells. You need to know what's secreted by alpha cells and what's secreted by beta cells. You need to know the role and function of insulin. You need to know the role and function of glucagon. You need to know the role and function of erythropoietin, the role and function of calcitriol, role and function of renin. I'm sorry? I just didn't hear your question.
What was the last one?
Renin. Uh-huh. All right. That covers it. You are now ready for the exam. Now, I'll make this point before I close out the media on the review. And we'll do a review session again at 3:30. If you go through the PowerPoints, everything you need to know is already highlighted. Now, it doesn't mean that you can just go to the highlighted portion and think that's going to do for the exam. You got to understand the material, so hopefully you've already read the chapter. But I've highlighted all of the answers for this already for you. Okay?
Is that the whole test for the entire exam?
No, just for the endocrine system, I have highlighted the PowerPoint for you already. So you don't have to search for this. It's already there. All you got to do is go through the PowerPoint. Okay? And I can't make it any easier than that. You just got to go to the PowerPoint. And all these questions have already been answered for you. So if you look at the highlighted portion there, that's the information. But you got to do your reading. You got to already read the endocrine system. Hopefully you've already done that. Now the other thing about the exam, you'll be able to take the exam from home, or you can take it from here. I posted the hours that's available for you for the computer lab. Now, it's a timed exam. So when you log on, you got to be able to finish it in the time that's allotted. There'll be 50 questions, 40 minutes. Okay? So now, if you have a dial-up and you plan to use dial-up, you're on your own. I can't promise you that the dial-up is going to allow you to move fast enough on the exam. I haven't tried it on dial-up. I've done it on the with DSL. It works fine. But so if you plan to use dial-up, I cannot promise you that that will work. I would highly recommend that you use DSL. If you don't have DSL, you got to do it here. You don't have to. You're on your own. But I would recommend you do it here. But you know to use the computers here, you have to have an HSC account to log on to the computers. Okay? Any questions about that? There's no password. All you have to do is log on. Anytime from Tuesday from 6 o'clock until Friday, 6 o'clock, you can log on and take the exam next week.
One of the hours that you have on there posted where we can take the exam in the computer lab is Veterans Day, and USF is supposed to be closed on Veterans Day. Are you sure the lab is going to be open?
I am not. Very good point. Is that a recognized holiday here?
It is.
Is it really? Okay, well, then I take that back. So from Tuesday, 6 o'clock until still Friday, 6 o'clock, but you can't take it here in the computer lab on that Friday. You can do it from home, but you can't take it here. So sorry, I didn't know that. Really? They didn't tell me that. The question is, am I going to have a lab review? Am I going to have a lab review? At 3:30. Okay, all right. We just had one, but we'll do it again.
Are you going to post the digestive system on webcast?
Yes, I am. Probably be up by tomorrow. I can't promise, but I've given them everything today, and it just takes them a little while to put it on. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. Okay. No other questions? Okay. For those of you who are going to stay for the lecture, great. Those of you who are going to leave now, give you 5 minutes to leave and get reorganized, then we'll start with the lecture. But only 5 minutes. I just don't want to start the lecture and then a bunch of folks leave. And it's all right. If you want to leave, that's okay.